Hi, I'm Brighton, and this is my wife, Kat, and we are now expats living in Mexico for the winters. And in this video, I'm going to share everything that we've gone through to make that happen so that if you're interested, maybe you could follow in our footsteps. I'm going to be going through this video chronologically, or at least the chronological order that I wish we had gone in some instances. But if you want to get to a specific spot in the video, say you're interested in immigration or buying a house and whatnot, down in the description, there'll be links to all the different chapters of this video. So this is going to be a long video covering all of it, and go down below to jump ahead. And this video is part 1 of 2. I started making the video as just one video, and I got to be putting in so much great stuff that I had to break it in half. So part 1 covers kind of, I like to say, procedural stuff, like buying or renting a house and getting your residency and crossing the border, driving down, things like that. Part 2 is going to cover things that you're spending money on. So things like shopping and setting up your telephone service or your internet service and getting gas to your house. So all the things that you're going to be paying for once you get here. So if you want to head over to that video, you'll find a link to it up here or here, can't remember. Also, be sure to leave your tips down in the comment section and check down in the comment section for tips from other viewers. And be sure to watch the upper right-hand corner of this video, because if I need to make any amendments or any updates, you'll find a link up there. So we bought a house just outside La Paz, Mexico, and La Paz is on the Baja Peninsula. So rules are a little bit different in the Baja Peninsula compared to the rest of Mexico. And it's kind of like a international free trade zone or something. So some of the rules are different. Definitely, if you're going to be following in our footsteps or becoming expats yourself, make sure to do a little extra research to make sure things aren't different on the mainland. Like one big thing is importing a vehicle and having a vehicle with American plates if you're a long-term resident. Just little things like that that are allowed in the Baja that aren't allowed on the mainland. But La Paz is the state capital of Baja California Sur. So Baja California is divided into 2 states, Baja California and Baja California Sur. We are down near the tip, about 2 hours north of Cabo. So a little background here. We live in Portland, Oregon during the summers, and we've been spending the last 4 winters down in San Diego, living in Ocean Beach, which is a really awesome place, but it's not quite warm enough for us in the winters, and it's incredibly expensive. So we started last year saying, like, well, what if we move to Mexico during the winters? Could we stretch our dollars even further and instead of doing 2 months during the winter, do 4 or 5 or 6, which was something we just couldn't afford in Southern California. So we actually did things a little different than the recommendation. So what we did is we flew down to La Paz just kind of on a whim for my wife's birthday. We did a weekend trip. It's really easy to get here from San Diego. So we flew into La Paz and checked it out. We liked the town. We talked to a real estate agent and we put an offer on a house. So that was kind of a long weekend. What most people recommend is that you give it a try first. Doing like a rental here, wherever you plan on going, renting a place first and spending a couple months there to see like, oh, is this the right place? Maybe even doing multiple seasons if you plan on being here long term. That's what's recommended. The good news is rentals are pretty inexpensive in Mexico. So just for instance, you could get for just $500 a month, you can get a furnished apartment in the downtown in a safe area of downtown La Paz. Or you could for, around $1,000 get an apartment in kind of the hot spot, the Malecon area of downtown where all the bars and restaurants and all the fun is. You could also spend about $2,000 and get a house in a community that's a little bit more secluded outside the city with a security guard and a pool and a hot tub and all that for about $2,000. And our neighbor's house is up on Airbnb. So for $2,700, you could get their house with a pool and it's right on the beach. There's a variety of what you could get here, but for the most part, it is so much less expensive than in the US. You're not really losing that much money by renting for a while, or a lot of people just rent long term. That is an option too, because for $500 a month, it's not so bad. So let's talk about buying the house. So that was something early that we did early in our journey to becoming expats. But we came down to La Paz, and my wife likes to talk to real estate agents and kind of see what's out there. We've done this a couple of times. So we talked to a real estate agent down here, and we saw a house online. We looked at some kind of online listings, and we saw a house that we liked, and it was, I think, $270,000 on the beach with a pool, really nice house. And it was a little bit towards the top end of what we could afford. But we said, you know what, let's just go look at it. So we set up a time to meet our real estate agent, Jim, and met at his office, and he and his wife drove us around to about 5 or 6 different properties so we could really understand what's available here. And actually the first one was really close to his office. It wasn't one that we had seen online, or we at least weren't interested in online. And we fell in love with it immediately. The first house we saw, it's got a palapa roof, which is a palm tree roof. It's a 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath house, plus a little casita, which is a little like studio apartment with a bathroom and a little bit of a kitchen and a bedroom and a pretty big garage on a half-acre lot. So we bought this. It ended up costing us about $165,000, $170,000. We bought this from a Canadian couple. So as you can see, a pretty big house. It is a fixer-upper. It still is a fixer-upper. The pool leaks. We're gonna have to do some work on that, but we are right on the beach, and that's something that we couldn't possibly do in the States, or even in a different part of Mexico like Cabo or Puerto Vallarta or something like that. So we are outside La Paz by about 15 or 20 minutes in a community called El Centenario. So we ended up looking at the house a couple of times that weekend, and our real estate agent was working with the real estate agent of the Canadian couple that owned the house. We went through, did the negotiation back and forth, kind of just typical like you would do in the States, and came up with an offer that they accepted. And then we were moving through the process of buying a house in another country. So first off, in Mexico, foreigners are not allowed to own property near the ocean or near the U.S. border. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's part of their constitution that only Mexicans can own property in those areas. So we are, of course, right on the water. So we had to go through a process called a fideicomiso. And this is just pretty standard. The government came up with this process because they were like, oh, you know, foreigners do want that land. So what we bought this house, and the house is held in trust by a bank. So we pay the bank about $400 or $500 a year for holding this trust for us. And I guess this is a pretty safe system. Yeah, so we don't exactly own it, but it's pretty safe that it is definitely ours. So that process took a little bit of extra time. So that was the first thing we saw here about things in Mexico take extra time. So specifically what that extra time meant was somewhere around 10 months, 9 months. This was the year of COVID, so things were a little extra slow this year, but there was some problems with canceling the old fideicomiso and the government offices being open, but it was definitely a long time. For us, it was okay because we didn't want to be here in the summer. It's really hot in La Paz. This is pretty much the desert here, and it gets up above 100 degrees on a regular basis in the summer. So there's a lot of people who love that here. We're here just for the gorgeous winters, which the average temperature is in the 70s during the day and usually sunny. It's hardly rained in the 6 weeks that we've been here. But our real estate agent was able to work it out perfectly. We closed on the house just a couple of days before we arrived. Then arrival was pretty simple. He just met us here, handed us the keys, handed us a stack of bills, the old bills from the house, which were going to be very important, and a little guide to the process that he recommended going through in terms of, you know, how to get water, how to get telephone, all these different things. It was a nice guide that he provided. But yeah, the actual moving in was pretty uneventful. Just unpacked our RV, and we were in the house. So let's talk a little bit more about the money aspect of this. Like I said, it was pretty cheap to buy a house here, but there were extra fees and whatnot. Like one was the fideicomiso that we had to pay $500, $400 a year for the fideicomiso to hold the house in trust. Another one was that the government charges a 2%, I think, transaction fee. So there was a tax that we had to pay when buying. And I don't know if those, they're definitely not common in the States. They might exist, but it was a little bit of a chunk of change. So closing costs were more than they would typically be in the States. And also from the aspect of buying the house, you have to have cash. You can't get a mortgage down here. That's not how it works. What we ended up doing was refinancing our house in Portland so that we could take money out and spend some of that money down here. So that was kind of our method to do it. We are right around 50 years old, and we had enough money and equity and whatnot saved up to make this happen. The sales of houses down here, they're listed typically in dollars because really these houses that are in the 100,000 up are meant for either very wealthy Mexicans or for expats, but they're listed in dollars. However, the actual transaction goes through in pesos. There is an issue there with the exchange rates. It doesn't really matter to you when you buy the house, but what's different is when you sell the house, if the exchange rate has changed, you could have a capital gain in pesos, but theoretically a loss in dollars. However, the Mexican government doesn't care what you're translating the money to. What they care about is the pesos. So say the Mexican dollar goes down, or sorry, the Mexican peso goes down against the dollar, you could end up getting a heck of a lot more Mexican pesos when you sell your house. Even if you sell it for the exact same amount of money, you could get significantly more Mexican pesos for those dollars. And then the government thinks that you made a lot of money and they're going to want their chunk of it. So that's something to consider. They also have, I can't remember if it's called reverse capital gains, but I think it's something, essentially, if you lose money on your house, you also have to pay, or actually the next owner has to pay. So you have to build that into the price. So it's a little odd. Look it up. But it has to do with, they don't want people kind of changing the price on the deed and putting money through under the table or whatnot. So if you end up getting a really, really, really super deal on a house, you might end up paying taxes on the extra money that you made by getting such a great deal. I am definitely not a real estate professional, so I don't completely understand that, but something to consider. There's also an aspect here of owning a house for at least 3 years as a resident and how that happens, how that works with your capital gains. We haven't really even looked into that yet, but something also to consider. So if you're going to start out with renting a place for a few months, you can come just on sometimes it's called a tourist visa, but if you're coming from the States, it's actually just an entry permit or an FMM that allows you into the country for, I think it's up to 6 months. We didn't really work with this because we went straight through and jumped ahead to getting our residency. And that was something, it was relatively easy to do, and there were definitely some benefits long-term. We don't have to leave the country and come back, and we don't have to file paperwork on a regular basis. But that's what I'm going to go into in this section, is talking about gaining your residency in Mexico. So there are two types of residency. One is a temporary resident and one is a permanent resident. So permanent is, you have a green card and you're able to come and go from Mexico and live here forever. The temporary resident is something that has to be renewed every year for up to 4 years. And after that point, you have to either switch back to being a tourist or become a permanent resident. So each of these residencies comes with a number of different requirements. And one of them is that you can prove that you're not going to end up essentially on like Mexican welfare, so that you're able to support yourself when you come into the country. I don't remember the exact numbers. You can look that up online. I'm sure they're going to change over time, but you need to have a certain amount of money, and it's all in relation to like the minimum wage here and how many days that you can survive. But for us, I want to say for permanent residency, it was that we each had to prove we had at least $130,000 in the bank. So, and that can include your retirement accounts. So that wasn't too hard for us to do that. And that was recommended by our real estate agent that we go straight for permanent residency. Originally, I started filing for temporary residency. It just seemed like the obvious thing to do, just kind of move along slowly. But he said, no, if you've got the money, go for permanent. And that way you won't have to go through the process every year. And having gone through the process, it's kind of nice to only go through it once. The way it starts is with an online form, and you fill out your form and you print up those the proof of how much money that you have in the bank. So just printing up bank statements. And then you schedule an appointment at your local Mexican embassy. Those are probably in most major cities in the US. We were in Portland, so we just had to go downtown, schedule something online. That was a really pretty easy process. So we went to the Mexican embassy. There were a whole bunch of people waiting outside for different things. We gladly just walked up to the door and they were like, oh, if you're here for your residency, just come right in. I'm not sure what everyone else was waiting for, but they kind of pushed us to the front of the line and took us into a separate office. It was very easy. They were very nice. They spoke English and they just made everything pretty simple. We had a fee there, $40 or something like that. And they took our pictures, gave us kind of like some paperwork and some instructions as to how to go from there. But that was really pretty simple to get done, the first step of the residency. So once we had completed that first step in person in Portland, I think we had 6 months to cross the border. So there's a number of different timelines and things that you really need to be keeping track of here. And then the final step in the process was what we had to do here in La Paz once we get here, and that will come in later too. So we ended up buying an old RV up in Portland because we have 2 cats and a dog, and we wanted to make that trip pretty easy. So we got this old RV to drive down. We stopped over in a number of different places, stopped in San Diego, just north of the border, and we chose to cross at a place called Mexicali East. So there's a number of different border crossings. Some are a little more busy and crazy. We had heard that Mexicali East was a pretty easy place to cross. And that was pretty simple. There's, we just kind of worked our way through up to the border. There was a nice place to take a pit stop and kind of get rearranged right before we crossed over. To the international border. Continue. I'm trying. Am I good? Yep, I think you're good. Yep. Okay. Something is ringing. I don't know if that's a good sign or a bad sign. They just kind of directed us around. It was nice. It was really pretty mellow there. There weren't a lot of people crossing. Okay, this guy's just telling us to pull over here. They just directed us over. Told me to stop filming because they saw that I was filming. They're only speaking Spanish there, so it was nice to have a little bit of Spanish, but they asked for our passports and they do want to search your vehicle. So they asked to board the vehicle. They asked if the dog was friendly. So we were able to kind of talk through that in Spanish, and they asked to open a couple of our cupboards and look and see what was inside. So a pretty easy search. What they're looking for mostly, I think, is guns, importing other things that are for sale that you're supposed to be claiming and paying importation fees on. But we didn't really have anything. We had stuff for our house, but it wasn't anything that they were concerned with. So once he was happy with his inspection, and these are really young guys too. These are all, like 18 and 20-year-old people that work for the military border crossings. But we're not the target there. The cartels are. So what's really going on is that guns are being smuggled into Mexico and drugs are being smuggled out of Mexico. But I won't go into the politics there. So once he was complete with the inspection, he was like, you're free to go. But luckily, we had done enough online research. We knew that we needed to get our stamp at the border because, remember, we had six months to cross the border and we needed a stamp. So he was like, oh, yeah, you can go over to that office and get your stamp. So this was a little bit confusing. We had crossed in Tijuana many times and just kind of driven across the border. No stamps, no nothing, just drive right into Mexico and go to the beaches, go to Tijuana, whatnot, just kind of anywhere within an hour probably of the border. And that's all the state of Baja, California. So we didn't really know that there was even an entry permit that we were supposed to get. It seems like they don't really enforce any of those rules in Baja California. It's when you cross into Baja California Sur, which is a few hours south, or 8 hours south maybe driving, that they want to see that permit sometime to make sure that you've done this correctly. So we've heard of many people getting turned around at that checkpoint to go back to the border to get their stamp. So if you're driving anywhere south, be sure to get that. If you're working on your permanent or temporary residency, be sure to get that stamp at the border. They will not tell you. It's not like in the United States where you file through a line and you get everything stamped and whatnot and everything's done for you. You have to know to ask for that. It was nice. They just told us to pull over our vehicle, just leave it where it was, and walk inside the building, go through a couple of things. This maybe took us 10 minutes or so with the woman there speaking Spanish to get our passports stamped. And we were on our way, driving through Mexicali and making our way towards Mexico 5, headed south. So let's continue with driving south. So once we made it out of Mexicali, it was pretty easy because 5 is like the big road down the eastern side of the Baja Peninsula, and there were a lot of signs for that. So it was nice to have 2 people looking for those signs. Pretty easy to get out of town. We didn't really stop. We had already gotten money back in the States, and I'll talk about money a little bit more. So we didn't have to worry about going to an ATM. We had filled up with gas in the U.S. on the northern side of the border, so we didn't have to worry about going to a gas station. All those things I'll be chatting about as we go. So let's talk about roadblocks. This is pretty common. I think there were 5 roadblocks between the border and La Paz. So what these are kind of military checkpoints. Once again, I think they're looking for guns and drugs, cartels, movements like that. They're not really worried about tourists, but they are military checkpoints, and sometimes they will ask you to show your passport or your entry permit or visa. Sometimes they're going to ask to get into your vehicle. We did have at one checkpoint, they went through and they just randomly chose one of our cupboards and asked us to open it, asked us to pull the things out and open the boxes so that they could see what was in there. Not too bad, all speaking Spanish, and then just letting us on our way. And it went all the way through to, from that was kind of the most invasive up to where they were just like, just waving us through the checkpoint and anything in between, just asking us questions like, can I see your passport and whatnot. So nothing to really worry about. And I guess there are potentially temporary checkpoints that are more random. So that happens too. But we didn't come across that. I think all the ones we went through were kind of the permanent checkpoints to be expected. And there's a number of videos online about going through those checkpoints. But one of the things we'd heard about was the Mexican police wanting bribes and pulling people over for different things, or at these checkpoints wanting bribes. We didn't come across any of that, but we did have money tucked away in a couple different places in our RV. So that just in case, we had money on us, we had money in different places in the RV. We were prepared that we were going to take our computers with us if they asked us to get out of the vehicle. I felt like we were prepared just in case they wanted to kind of dig through our vehicle, because we'd heard of other people losing stuff in that process, but we didn't have any problems whatsoever. With the money situation, we started out by going to our bank in Portland and exchanging money so that we had just a big stack. I think we had $500 worth of pesos, which is a heck of a lot of pesos, and put in different places throughout the RV so that in case something happened, we could get to them if we needed to, or not get to them if we needed not to. But the police in Mexico are heavily armed. So there's a number of different levels. I don't fully understand it. There's kind of the federal police. There's the National Guard. I'm not sure if the federal police have gone away and gotten folded into the National Guard just within the last year. There's the state police. There's the local police. Often you will see them driving around in pickup trucks with these National Guardsmen or whatnot, police officers in the back, in fatigues, faces covered with machine guns. And they're actually very nice. You can wave and they're very nice, but you do need to get used to seeing that it's a little bit different than the police in the United States, although the police in the United States are getting more militarized. Sorry, staying out of politics. So the roads in Mexico are not as nice as the roads in the United States. Just across the board, they're not as nice. You don't have the big wide shoulders. You don't have the big wide lanes. You don't have the hyper engineering to make everything super easy and almost mindless to drive. Most of the roads down through Baja now are paved and in decent shape. There was a small section that was kind of unpaved, but I'd say less than a mile. And there were some sections that were like 4-lane roads with wide shoulders that were pretty new. So it just depends on where you're going, what the conditions of the roads are going to be. There was one section that was pretty scary, especially in an RV, in terms of how narrow the lanes were, that it was one lane in each direction. Semis were coming around the bends. It was very twisty, big drop-offs. We saw a number of dead cows that had been hit on the road. We saw cars that had flipped over and gone down the ravine. We came around one hairpin turn and traffic in the other direction was stopped because they were pulling a semi out of the ravine. And often the guardrails are not necessarily repaired. So where there was a guardrail, if a car went over, it's just a kind of a dangling guardrail. Go slow and be careful. And as we read online, do not attempt to drive at night. There are things called topes. I think I'm pronouncing that right. They're huge speed bumps. They come out of nowhere. You really have to be paying attention for those. And at night, you could just completely miss them. Or there's some potholes in the road, too, that you want to watch out for. So you have to be pretty cautious driving. But overall, it wasn't too bad, except for, 10 miles of rather chilling and scary driving. So we spent 2 nights in Mexico as we were driving down at kind of campgrounds that were set up for RVs. And so that was pretty pleasant. And they were, I want to say, $10 or $20 a night. So pretty inexpensive. There's also hotels along the way, but because we were in an RV, we didn't need that. So there's a number of different accommodations. You should have to plan it out so that you're getting there before nightfall. You also want to be planning out your gas stations, especially if you're coming down the Pacific side on Mexico 1. There's a gap that is like 230 miles or something with no gas stations. So you definitely want to fill up before, and then as soon as you get out of that, fill up again. Because we were in an RV, we had about a 250-mile range, but because we took the eastern route, we didn't have to worry about that nearly as much. But it's definitely something to check out and plan ahead in terms of gas stations. Most of the gas stations took credit cards, but we've heard that sometimes their credit card machine isn't working, so you want to have cash. And if you're driving an RV and it costs $100+ to fill up the tank, that's like 2,000 pesos. You want to have a lot of pesos with you just in case you need to pay in cash. And you can get cash at ATMs in most of the bigger towns. And we found that they were, Google was a good source of finding the things that we needed. But let's talk about car insurance. You have to have separate Mexican car insurance. And if you're only coming across the border for a day, it's something like $20 or $30. So it's a pretty pricey by the day. But for a 6-month policy or even a year policy, I want to say for our RV, it was too old to have comprehensive coverage, but we had like $500,000 or $500,000 coverage for liability. And I want to say it was, I don't know, between $100 and $200 for 6 months, and maybe just a tiny little bit more if we wanted to do a full year. So definitely get the Mexican coverage. You need to have it. Yeah, we've heard some nightmares if you don't have it, you get pulled over and you don't have the insurance with you or your registration, things like that. Be sure to have that. We did get into a little bit of a car accident. We hit the mirror of a truck coming the other direction, and this is pretty common because the roads are so narrow. But so we had a little bit of fun there. We ended up just paying cash and exchanging information instead of going. They're like, oh, well, we're heading to the next town to the north, which we had just driven through about an hour before. And they said, well, we can go to the police station there and get a report and then file insurance. And we were like, oh my God, let's just give you cash. Of course, it was pretty much a brand new pickup truck, and someone who was not. It wasn't their truck. So that's one thing we realize is that people down here driving on these roads are pretty used to going to the outsides of the lane when they're passing and knowing which vehicles they're most likely to have a problem with. So for cars, it wasn't a problem because their mirrors were low and we were higher. For semis, their mirrors were higher so we could pass. It was just when you got into the range of trucks that were the same size as our RV that our mirrors just ding, hit, smashed the window. and they only spoke Spanish. They were professionals and they only spoke Spanish, but we worked it through, wrote stuff out. We still communicated, and we ended up giving them some more money later to pay for the repairs to the truck, so to that mirror. What was beautiful there is we had that extra money hidden away, so we were able to pull that out and pay them and continue on our journey, not had to turn around. And we didn't have to worry because it was our last day on the trip. Otherwise, we would have had a shattered window open all the time, and at night that would have been a little bit scary if we were in an RV park with the windows open while we're sleeping. So on the late afternoon of our third day, we arrived at our house and just pulled in, met our real estate agent. It was pretty unceremonious. He just handed us the keys and handed us a stack of bills. I think I mentioned that earlier, and that guide. And was pretty much like, hey, if you have any questions, I'm here for you. There was a caretaker that had lived here on the property. And so he lived in a separate RV on the property. This is a half-acre property. He was here just kind of making sure he was paying the bills for the Canadian couple. He was paying them in person and then getting the money transferred to him. Also just letting in like cleaning people or gardeners, just kind of taking care of the place and making there be a presence on the property. So there's a couple of different options for that. Some people have a caretaker. It seems like the normal situation is to kind of like they live there for free in exchange for watching your property. Our neighbor, for instance, Carrie, she lives in Utah, and she has a service. It's a gentleman that comes by. He kind of manages anything with the property, comes by once a week, flushes the toilets, makes sure everything is still working, and deals with any problems, pays the gardener, just kind of keeps things running with the house. There's also a service here in La Paz that will do that a little bit more. There's a couple of Americans that have this business set up to take care of everything while you're gone. So there are options for taking care of your property. The property here had a security system. We have upgraded that. So we'll be able to, at any point in time from Portland, pull on the cameras here and see everything that's going on at the property. We feel pretty secure without having someone living here full time. But Bill has been really helpful for just understanding how things work down here. So not only working with our realtor who's like, okay, this is how things work, but also having the someone who's lived on the property who's like, oh yeah, that light switch controls that. Or, oh, you have to go to this place to change the telephone service into your name. Or you need to go to this place, or this is where I pay this bill, things like that. Just, it's definitely been nice having someone guide us through. And there are services in other places. I think up, like near Cancun, we've seen on the internet where there are people who just do everything for you, who kind of make this transition easy. And that definitely would be worth it, having gone through it. So we're going to keep digging in though. So one of the first things we did kind of procedurally when we got here was to take care of that residency. We had 30 days since crossing the border to go from our entry permit, that it was a 30-day entry permit, to getting that turned into our green cards and finalizing our permanent residency. It wasn't too bad. We went down and, kind of sat in line. They went and talked to them, sometimes in Spanish, sometimes in English. There was one woman there who spoke pretty good English and could help us through this. But we learned all the things that we didn't have, like we had to go online and fill out a form online. And then we needed copies. You definitely need a lot of copies. You need to print out everything yourself and make copies of your own visa, or your own passport, your own electric bills, all those things. You have to make copies of them yourself. You can't just take in things to an office and have them just kind of make a copy for you. You go to papelerias or places that make copies. We went to one a number of times to fill out the forms. Okay, so we had to return to the internet/copy shop to make copies of 3 different documents. And now we're heading back to the immigration office. So right down the street from the immigration office, there was a papeleria where we could use the internet, print out forms, make copies, We had to head over to the bank. So you actually make the payment not at the immigration office, but they give you kind of like a receipt that you take to the bank, and then you deposit the funds into their account, and then you come back with a stamped receipt that says that you've done that. So there was definitely a lot of going to make more copies, do different things, kind of get the right paperwork in order, and make it back there in time to go through the process. So one time we came back close to the end of the day, and they were like, sorry, too close to the end of the day to finish this. Come back tomorrow. I think it ended up being 3 trips to the immigration office to kind of work through things. And then they took our pictures, and I'd say it was just a couple days later that they sent us an email saying everything's ready. So come on back to pick it up. And that was really simple. So we were able to pick up our green cards, have our green cards that we could carry with us in our wallets for the rest of our time here in Mexico. So you are going to need to go to the immigration office in the nearest town. So there are 4 immigration offices in Baja California Sur, which is the state that we're in. So most of the bigger towns have them: Cabo, La Paz, Laredo. There was one more. So if you are staying in a more remote area, it might be an hour or two to get to a place that has an immigration office. And hopefully you'll be able to move through that process a little more smoothly than us. Okay, so that is the last process-related topic that I'm going to cover. But next up, we're going to be talking pesos, banking, and shopping, and internet service, and all those things that you're going to be spending money on once you're down here. You can go over here and click on this video, and that's going to take you to part 2 of this series. And one last reminder to leave your tips down in the comments and check down there for other viewer-related tips. I'll see you in part 2.